My wife left me for a younger, richer tech guy. She texted, "Enjoy being poor forever." 2 years later, her new husband begged for an investor. He walked into the meeting room and I was sitting in the chair. That happened on a Thursday morning, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Portland, Oregon. His name was Ryan Kellner, 34 years old, Stanford MBA, the kind of man who described himself as a serial entrepreneur at dinner parties in a way that communicated he expected you to be impressed before he told you what the company did. He walked in with a pitch deck on his laptop and the specific nervous energy of someone who needed this meeting to go well and who had told himself it was going to go well and who was managing the gap between those two things. He saw the chair at the head of the conference table. Then he saw me in it. He stopped walking. His laptop bag hit the door frame. I looked at him. I said, "Good morning, Ryan, please sit down." The specific quality of the silence that followed was one I am going to carry with me for a long time. 11 seconds. I counted them. He sat. He opened his laptop. His hands were not entirely steady. I said, "I understand you are looking for a Series A commitment of $4 million for Kellner Analytics." He said, "Yes." I said, "Tell me about the company." He told me about the company. I listened to the whole pitch. And when he finished, I told him exactly what I was going to do. But before I tell you what happened in that conference room, I need to take you back 26 months earlier to a Tuesday evening in our house in Lake Oswego, Oregon, when my wife of 11 years sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me she was leaving. Everything starts there. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you are new here, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Every week a new story. Let us go back to the beginning. My name is Thomas Greer, and I am 52 years old. I grew up in Springfield, Oregon, a working-class city across the river from Eugene that most people outside Oregon had not heard of, and that people inside Oregon either grew up in and left or grew up in and stayed, with very little middle ground. My father, Donald Greer, spent 30 years as a machinist at a precision parts manufacturer outside Springfield. He was the kind of man who measured things twice before cutting once, and who applied this approach not just to metal, but to everything else in his life. Decisions, conversations, commitments. He was slow to say things, and when he said them, they were the result of actual thinking rather than immediate reaction. He was also a man who showed up. Not metaphorically, literally. He was at every school event, every game, every dinner. He was present in the way that required physical presence and actual attention simultaneously, which was rarer than most people realized. My mother, June, worked as an office manager for a dental practice in Springfield for 22 years. She was organized in the specific way that office managers were organized when the organization was a genuine personality trait rather than a professional posture. She knew where everything was, what every appointment was, what every person in a room needed before they finished saying it. She also read constantly, every night after dinner. While my father watched television and my younger brother Danny played video games, my mother read. Novels, history, anything that held her attention. She had the specific quality of someone who was always building internal resources, always adding to what she knew, always making herself more capable of understanding complex situations. I inherited her reading habit and my father's tendency to measure twice. Those two things built everything I eventually built. I was not a remarkable student in high school. Good, but not exceptional. What I was remarkable at was building things. Physical things initially. I had a shop class teacher named Mr. Brennan who recognized early that I had a specific gift for understanding how components related to each other in 3 dimensions, and who pushed me toward more complex projects than the standard curriculum required. I also built things in the organizational sense. I was the person who, when a group project was assigned, naturally understood how to decompose it into components and assign them in a way that produced a result greater than what the individual contributors would have produced alone. This was systems thinking applied to human organizations rather than to mechanical ones. I went to the University of Oregon in 1991. Business administration. I paid for it through a combination of a small academic scholarship and a part-time job at a lumber yard in Springfield during summers and a second job at a campus copy center during the school year. I did not experience college as the entertainment period that some of my peers experienced it as. I experienced it as the specific preparation period it was supposed to be, and I treated it accordingly. I met my wife, Sandra, at the University of Oregon in my junior year. She was studying communications. She had the specific social ease of someone who had grown up in a large family in a social environment where being good in rooms was a survival skill rather than a performance. She was warm, engaging, quick to laugh, genuinely interested in the people around her. We dated for 2 years in college. We stayed together for 3 years after graduation while we both established ourselves in the Portland area. I had gotten a job at a supply chain consulting firm in downtown Portland. She had gotten a job at a marketing agency. We married in 1999. The early years of the marriage were the specific good years of two people building lives in parallel who were also genuinely building something together. We both worked hard. We both had ambition that was real rather than performed. We had real conversations at the end of long days about what we were each trying to figure out and what was working and what was not. Our daughter, Chloe, was born in 2003. Those years, the new parent years, the early career years, were the years that required the most of both of us, and that I think produced a specific gap that I was not fully aware of while it was developing. I was building. The consulting firm had given me 8 years of the specific education that came from sitting inside different companies, supply chain operations, and understanding what was broken and what it would take to fix it. By 2005, I had a clear picture of a software platform that would address the most common and most expensive supply chain coordination problem I had been watching across dozens of clients. I started building it in 2006 in the same pattern that serious building always happened in at that stage of life, in the evenings, on weekends, in the specific hours that were not accounted for by the job and the family. Sandra knew I was working on something. She knew it was important to me. What she did not know, and what I perhaps did not communicate well enough, was the full scale of what I was building toward and the specific timeline it required. The gap between what I was building and what she needed from our marriage grew slowly, and then faster. I did not see it clearly enough until it was too late to address it before the specific event that ended the marriage arrived. Subscribe right now and stay with me, because the next section is where everything breaks. The software platform was called ChainSync. I want to tell you what it did, because the specific thing it did is relevant to everything that came after. Large companies had supply chains that involved dozens or hundreds of suppliers, logistics partners, and downstream distributors. The coordination of information across all of those parties, who had what, where it was, when it was arriving, what the current status of every shipment and inventory position was handled through a combination of email, spreadsheets, phone calls, and enterprise software systems that talk to each other badly or not at all. The cost of this coordination failure was enormous. Companies held excess inventory because they lacked real-time visibility into what was coming. Shipments were delayed because the information that would have prevented the delay was sitting in an email that the wrong person received. Production lines stopped because components that should have been tracked were lost in a system gap. I had been watching this problem from the inside of dozens of companies for 8 years. ChainSync was a platform that connected all of the parties in a supply chain into a single real-time information environment. Every shipment, every inventory position, every supplier status update in one place, accessible to everyone who needed it, automatically updated without requiring anyone to manually reconcile anything. The concept was sound. The execution took 4 years of evenings and weekends. By 2010, I had a working prototype. By 2011, I had 3 paying clients. By 2012, I left the consulting firm and took ChainSync full-time. Sandra and I had a conversation about this decision that I want to be honest about. She was supportive in the technical sense. She said the right things. She understood that this was what I had been working toward for 4 years, and she understood that the timing was as good as it was going to get. What she said near the end of that conversation was, "Thomas, I need you to be present while you do this. I need the business to be the thing you do, not the whole thing you are." I said, "I understand." I did not fully understand. Not because I was dismissive of what she said, because I genuinely believed I could build ChainSync into something significant while maintaining the quality of presence she was describing. I had been doing both for 4 years while also holding a full-time job. Surely full-time on ChainSync with no other job would produce more presence rather than less. The opposite happened. When ChainSync was a side project, the hours were defined, evenings and weekends. The rest of the time was the job and the family. When ChainSync became the whole thing, the hours were unlimited. There was always something that needed doing. There was always a client issue or a product problem or a business development opportunity or a financial situation that required attention. The edges of the workday disappeared, and what filled the space was almost always the company. Sandra and I had fewer real conversations in 2012 and 2013 than we had had in 2005 and 2006, when I was also working full-time and building ChainSync on the side. I knew this. I told myself I would address it after the Series A was closed, after the next client was landed, after the product was stable. There was always an after. The after never arrived before Sandra did. In late 2014, she started attending a professional development series in Portland through her marketing agency. She mentioned it in passing in the way that people mentioned things when they were not expecting the thing to become significant. A speaker series, monthly, various tech and marketing industry people presenting on things relevant to her work. Ryan Kellner was one of the speakers. He was 32 at the time. He had sold his first company, a data analytics tool, the previous year for $12 million. He was working on his second company. He was the specific kind of person who was good at presenting himself in rooms and who had a life story that was compelling in the specific way that early tech success stories were compelling. Sandra came home from the March session and mentioned him. She mentioned him again after the April session. In May, she mentioned that she had run into him at a coffee shop near her office. I registered all of this. I said nothing because there was nothing yet to say, and because I was in the middle of closing a contract with a client in Seattle that required my full attention for 6 days, and because I told myself I would talk to Sandra properly when the Seattle situation was handled. The Seattle situation was handled in June. I sat down with Sandra on a Saturday morning. She told me before I could start. She said, "Thomas, I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "I have feelings for someone." I said, "Ryan Kellner." She looked at me. She said, "Yes." I said, "Has anything happened?" She said, "No, but I know what I am feeling, and I think you deserve to know rather than me managing it in private." I said, "I appreciate that." I said it and I meant it. And I also felt the specific physical sensation of a floor dropping away that people described when something that had been solid was suddenly not. We talked for 4 hours that Saturday. By the end of it, the marriage was over in the essential sense, even though the practical ending took several more months. I want to be honest about something. The marriage ending was real and it hurt in real ways. 11 years. Chloe, who was 11, the specific life we had built together. But I also, sitting with it for the months it took to process, understood that Sandra had not made a bad person's choice. She had made the choice of someone whose marriage had been underpowered for 3 years and who had found something that had the energy she was missing. I had been absent while being present. That was the honest accounting. The text she sent 3 months after the divorce was final was a different thing. She sent it on a Thursday evening. She and Ryan had been together for about 7 months at that point and engaged for 2. The text said, "I hope you find what you are looking for, Thomas. Ryan makes more in a month than you make in a year and he is still excited about life. I have what I should have had. Enjoy being poor forever." I read it once. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I went back to work. Subscribe right now. The next section is where ChainSync becomes something that changes everything. I want to tell you what the text did and did not do. What it did, it confirmed something I had been processing about how Sandra had experienced the marriage. The specific lens through which she had been watching me for the last 3 years was a financial one, and from that lens, the accounting was accurate. Ryan Kellner had sold a company for $12 million. I had an early-stage software platform with 3 paying clients and a burn rate that required careful management. What it did not do, change anything about what I was building or why I was building it. I put the text in the same mental folder where I had kept the information about what was happening in my marriage during the years. I had been too focused on ChainSync to address it properly. The folder where I kept true things that were painful and that I intended to use correctly eventually. I went back to work. ChainSync in 2015 was at a stage where the next 12 months were going to determine whether it became something significant or remained a small, capable tool used by a handful of mid-sized companies. I had 2 major problems. The first was product. ChainSync's core functionality was strong, but the user experience was not good enough for the buyers I needed to reach at larger enterprises. Large companies had enterprise software teams with high standards for interface design and integration quality. ChainSync's interface had been built by me, and I was a capable developer but a mediocre designer. The second was sales. I was selling ChainSync myself through the consulting relationships I had maintained from my previous career. That approach had got me to 3 clients and was not going to scale. I solved the product problem by hiring a UX designer named Angela Park, who had spent 6 years at a Portland software company, and who came in and in 90 days rebuilt the interface in ways that made the platform significantly more competitive. Angela also connected me to her former colleague James Tran, who had been doing enterprise software sales in the Pacific Northwest for 8 years, and who was the specific combination of technical understanding and relationship development that enterprise sales required. James joined as head of sales in early 2016. Within 6 months, he had 3 qualified pipeline opportunities at companies twice the size of any client we had previously engaged. By the end of 2016, ChainSync had 11 clients. By the end of 2017, we had 27. I want to be clear about what 27 enterprise clients for a supply chain coordination platform meant in revenue terms. Enterprise software clients paid annually. The average contract value for ChainSync's enterprise tier was $240,000 per year. 27 clients at average enterprise contract value was approximately $6.5 million in annual recurring revenue. That was the number at the end of 2017. The number at the end of 2018 was $11.2 million. During 2018, I also closed the Series A round that I had been building toward for 3 years. $8 million from 2 Portland-based venture funds that had been watching ChainSync's growth and that had the specific patience for enterprise software investments that this stage required. The Series A allowed me to hire properly across every function the company needed. By the time 2019 ended, I had 41 employees, 23 million in annual recurring revenue, and a company that 3 separate industry analysts had named as one of the most significant emerging enterprise supply chain platforms in the North American market. I also had a meeting scheduled for January of 2020. An investor meeting. A company called Kellner Analytics had contacted my investment firm through a mutual connection and requested consideration for a Series A investment. The name registered. I called my EA, a woman named Priya who had been managing my schedule for 2 years and who was the most organized person I had ever encountered in my professional life. I said, "Priya, the Kellner Analytics meeting, what do we know about the founder?" She said, "Ryan Kellner, second company. First company sold in 2013 for 12 million. Kellner Analytics is a data intelligence platform for mid-size marketing firms, 14 months old, looking for 4 million in Series A." I said, "Is he connected to anyone we know?" She said, "One mutual. He is married to Sandra Kellner, previously Sandra Greer." She said it without inflection. I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Keep the meeting." She said, "Of course." I said, "Do not brief anyone else on the connection." She said, "Understood." I sat in my office for about 10 minutes after that call. I thought about the enjoy being poor forever text. I thought about Chloe, who was now 16 and who was living primarily with Sandra, but who spent significant time with me, and who had the specific quality of a teenager who was watching both of her parents very carefully and drawing her own conclusions. I thought about what I was going to do in that meeting room. The answer was clear before the 10 minutes were up. I was going to do exactly what I would do in any investor meeting. I was going to listen to the pitch and evaluate it honestly on the merits and make a decision based on what the numbers and the market and the founder demonstrated. The personal element would be there. I was not pretending it would not be there, but it was going to stay where it belonged in that mental folder, and the decision was going to come from the right place. Stay with me right here, because the next section is the meeting. Ryan Kellner walked into the conference room on a Thursday morning, and his laptop bag hit the door frame when he saw me. I had been in the room for 20 minutes before he arrived. I had a cup of coffee. I had the Kellner Analytics executive summary that Priya had prepared from publicly available information and from the pitch materials Ryan had submitted. I had reviewed it carefully. What I was looking at was a company with a real problem it was solving. Marketing data is fragmented across platforms, and mid-size marketing firms had no good way to synthesize it into actionable intelligence, and an execution that was struggling with 2 specific things. The product was ambitious enough that it was taking longer to build properly than the runway allowed. And Ryan's sales approach, which worked well with his existing network from the first company, was not translating efficiently to new enterprise relationships. These were recognizable problems. I had lived versions of both of them. Ryan sat. He opened his laptop. He looked at me. He said, "Thomas Greer." I said, "Ryan Kellner." He said, "You are the investor." I said, "I am one of the investors being considered for this round." He said, "How?" I said, "I built a company called ChainSync, enterprise supply chain coordination software. We closed a Series A in 2018. We are currently at north of 20 million in annual recurring revenue. I have been making early-stage investments for 2 years alongside running ChainSync." He said, "I had no idea." I said, "I know." He said, "Sandra never." I said, "Sandra and I do not discuss my business in detail. Our communication is co-parenting focused. He said, right. He was very still. I said, Ryan, I want to tell you something before you give me your pitch. He waited. I said, I read your executive summary and your preliminary financials last night. I have some genuine interest in what Kellner Analytics is doing. The problem you are solving is real. The market is large. Your first company demonstrated that you can build and sell a product. He said, but. I said, but the pitch you came in here to give me was built for a different kind of investor meeting than this one. So I am going to ask you to do something unusual. He said, what? I said, tell me the truth about where the company actually is. Runway, product status, the sales pipeline reality, all of it. The version you would tell a mentor rather than the version you would tell an investor you are trying to impress. He looked at me. He said, why? I said, because the honest version is the only version I can actually evaluate properly. And because I think you understand that performing in this specific room is not going to produce a useful outcome regardless of how good the performance is. He sat with that. He looked at his laptop. He closed it. He said, okay, the honest version. He told me the honest version. And the honest version was this. Kellner Analytics had 14 months of runway remaining at current burn. The product had been in development for 18 months and was 8 weeks from a version that was genuinely ready for enterprise clients. Ryan had 5 letters of intent from companies in his existing network, but those LOIs were soft. The companies were interested, but had not seen the final product, and 2 of them were legacy relationships from the first company that might not convert. The sales pipeline outside the existing network was thin. Ryan had focused his time on product development and had not built the sales infrastructure to develop new relationships at the required rate. He had 6 months to demonstrate traction with the new enterprise-ready product before his existing investors would expect metrics that justified the Series A he was seeking. That was the honest version. I listened to all of it. I said, the product timeline, 8 weeks. Is that accounting for testing and stability work, or is that the development completion date? He said, development completion. Testing and stability is 4 weeks after that, 12 weeks total to enterprise ready. I said, so you have 2 months of buffer between product readiness and the point where your existing investors are expecting Series A metrics. He said, yes. I said, and your sales infrastructure to move LOIs to signed contracts after the product is ready. He said, limited. I have 1 salesperson and myself. I said, who is the salesperson? He said, good, but 1 person. I said, what does 4 million get you specifically? He said, 3 additional enterprise salespeople with supply chain relationships, product hardening for the full feature set, marketing to support the sales team's outreach. I said, what is the 12-month ARR projection if you close this round and execute the plan? He told me. I looked at the number. It was aggressive. I said, that is achievable if the sales hires are right and the product performs as expected. It is aggressive if either of those variables is worse than planned. He said, yes. I said, have you interviewed any of the sales candidates yet? He said, 2. Neither of them was right. I said, what specifically was wrong with them? He told me. The answers were specific and accurate. He understood what he needed, and he had assessed the candidates correctly. That told me something important. He had good judgment about people in his domain. The judgment gap was in knowing what he did not know, specifically in sales infrastructure and enterprise relationship development, which were the areas where his first company's success had depended on a product that had stronger organic pull than Kellner Analytics currently had. I said, Ryan, I am going to tell you what I see. He said, okay. I said, the company has a real problem it is solving and a founder who can build. The execution gaps are in sales infrastructure and in the time pressure from runway. Those gaps are addressable. He said, are you going to invest? I said, I am going to tell you what I am considering. He said, okay. I said, I am considering a term sheet for $2 million, half of your ask, at terms I will specify. And I want to introduce you to James Tran, who is my head of sales at Chainsing and who has agreed to join your advisory board and spend 4 hours a month helping you build the sales infrastructure and evaluate the hire candidates. He said, 2 million is half of what we need. I said, yes. 2 million on my terms gets you to enterprise-ready product and the first 2 sales hires with a buffer. If the traction in the first 60 days after product launch is what I believe it can be with the right infrastructure, you will have the data to go back to your existing investors for the remainder of the round at a much stronger position. He said, and if it is not? I said, then the honest answer is that the company has structural challenges that 4 million would not have fixed either. He was quiet. He said, why are you doing this, honestly? I said, the honest answer has 2 parts. He said, tell me. I said, part 1. The investment case is real. I have been watching supply chain adjacent problems for 15 years, and I understand the specific value of good data intelligence in the marketing operations context. Kellner Analytics is solving a problem that has a large addressable market, and you have the founder profile to execute on it if you get the infrastructure right. He said, and part 2. I said, part 2 is that your wife sent me a text 2.5 years ago that said, enjoy being poor forever. And sitting here with the ability to either walk away or write a check, I chose to write a check because the check is the right thing for the company and because what I am is someone who makes the right call regardless of what else is in the room. Ryan looked at me for a long time. He said, she told you that? I said, yes. He said, I did not know she said that. I said, I know. He said, Thomas. I said, Ryan, the personal history between our families is going to stay out of this transaction. We are going to do this on the merits or we are not going to do it. I want your answer to the 2 million structure by end of business Friday. He said, I will have it to you by noon Friday. He called at 11:45 Friday morning. He said, yes. The term sheet closed in February of 2020. James Tran started his advisory engagement with Kellner Analytics in March. The first thing James did was what James always did. He sat with Ryan for 2 days and mapped the existing pipeline in exhaustive detail and identified the 2 most convertible LOIs and built a specific 6-week plan for moving them to signed contracts before the enterprise-ready product launched. Both converted. Both within the 6-week window. The first enterprise-ready product demo happened in April. By June, Kellner Analytics had 4 signed enterprise contracts. By September, they had 9. The existing investors, seeing the traction, agreed to participate in the remainder of the Series A at the metrics Ryan brought them. I also participated in that round. My first check had returned what I expected in terms of demonstrating the company's trajectory. The second check was based on 12 months of watching that trajectory from a position of genuine information. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Chloe in the fall of that year. She was 17. She was in her junior year of high school, and she had the specific quality she had always had, the clear-eyed directness of someone who watched situations before commenting on them, and who commented on them accurately when she did. She called me on a Sunday afternoon. She said, Dad, Mom told me you invested in Ryan's company. I said, yes. She said she seemed surprised. I said, I imagined she was. She said, were you surprised that you did it? I said, no, the investment case was real. She said, was there more to it than that? I said, what do you mean? She said, Dad. I said, yes, there was more to it. She said, tell me. I said, your mother sent me a text that said some things when she and Ryan got together. I kept those things in a mental folder. The investment was the answer to the things in that folder. She was quiet. She said, what things did she say? I said things about money, about my future, about whether I was going to be okay. She said, and you answered by writing him a check. I said, I answered by building ChainSync. The check was just the most recent expression of the answer. She said, Dad. I said, yes. She said, that is the most you have ever done. I said, your grandmother would say I measured twice before cutting. She laughed. I said, how is school? She said, good. Can I tell you something? I said, always. She said, I am proud of you. I have been watching what you built since I was in middle school. I watched you do it while you were also being my dad, and I want you to know that I see it. I sat with that for a moment. I said, thank you, Chloe. She said, I love you, Dad. I said, I love you. That was the call that mattered most in 2020. ChainSync continued growing through 2020 and into 2021. In the fall of 2021, we were acquired by a publicly traded enterprise software company headquartered in Seattle. The acquisition price was $82 million. I want to say that number plainly because Sandra's text said, enjoy being poor forever, and I want the sentence that follows the accounting to be accurate. $82 million. Not all at once. The structure had earnout components tied to product integration milestones, but the first payment at closing was substantial, and the total value was real and documented and final. I called my father when the closing happened. He was 74. He was retired from the machinist job. He lived in Springfield in the house he had lived in for 40 years. He picked up on the second ring. I told him the number. He was quiet for a moment. He said, that is a significant number. I said, yes. He said, are you happy with what you built? I said, yes. He said, good, that is what matters. He said, come visit. I said, this weekend. I drove to Springfield that Saturday. My mother made dinner. We sat at the same kitchen table I had sat at my entire childhood. My father said, tell me about the company, what it actually did. I told him, in the plain language that made sense to him, the specific problem, the specific solution, the specific result. He listened the way he always listened, all the way through. Then he said, you saw a problem and you fixed it. I said, yes. He said, took a while. I said, 15 years from first version to acquisition. He said, I machined parts for 30 years, every part the same. You have done one thing for 15 years that turned into something different from what it was when you started. I said, yes. He said, that is harder. I said, different hard. He said, yes, different hard. He reached over and put his hand on my arm. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Ryan Kellner called me in December of 2021. Kellner Analytics had closed its Series B the previous month. He was building something real. The trajectory from where he had been in that Thursday morning conference room to where he was 18 months later was the specific trajectory of someone who had gotten the right support at the right moment and who had done something with it. He said, Thomas, I want to say something to you. I said, say it. He said, what you did in that meeting room was the most unusual thing anyone has done for me professionally. You could have passed. You had every reason to pass. I said, the investment case was real. He said, you said that in the room, but we both know there was a version of you that could have walked out and nobody would have blamed you. I said, yes. He said, "Why didn't you?" I said, "Because walking out would have been the emotional decision, and I have spent my whole life trying to make the right decision rather than the satisfying decision." He said, "Those are not the same thing." I said, "Almost never." He said, "The text she sent you." I said, "I know about it now." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "Ryan, you and Sandra built a life. I hope it is a good one. Chloe is the part of my life with Sandra that I carry forward. Everything else is finished." He said, "You are a more settled person than most people I know." I said, "I am a person who learned to put the right things in the right folders." He said, "What folder is the text in?" I said, "It is in the answered folder now." He said, "Because of ChainSync." I said, "Because of the work that built ChainSync. The text just confirmed I was pointed in the right direction." There is something I want you to understand about this story before you go. The $82 million acquisition was real. The conference room moment was real. The text that said, "Enjoy being poor forever," was real. And none of those things are the point of this story. The point is this: I was absent from my marriage in the years when I should have been present. I was building something real, but I was using the building as an excuse for the absence, and that is on me, and I have owned it completely. What came after the marriage ended, the building of ChainSync, the investment in Kellner Analytics, the acquisition, the folder in my head where I kept the text for 2.5 years. All of that was the result of the specific personal discipline of someone who decided that the response to being told "enjoy being poor forever" was to build something that answered that sentence with actual results. The building was always the right response. The building was always what I should have been doing. What I should also have been doing was being present enough in the marriage to have the conversations that Sandra needed to have before she needed to have them with someone else. I own both of those things. I carry the first one as accomplishment. I carry the second one as a lesson that cost something real. Chloe is 21 now. She is at the University of Oregon, studying the same kind of business courses I studied, asking the same kinds of questions I asked, watching situations before she acts in them the way I watched them. She is the best thing I have ever built, by a significant margin. Drop a comment right now and tell me something that stayed with you from this story. Tell me about the folder you are keeping. Tell me about the building you are doing. Tell me where you are watching from. I read every single comment. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. New story every week, and everyone earns your time. Thank you for being here.